Okay, we're interviewing Mr. Harvey S. Sutton at the Saratoga Armory, July 30, 2001. Interviewer is Michael Akey. Videographer is Wayne Clark. Mr. Sutton, where were you born?
Dr. Sutton.
Dr. Sutton, I'm sorry. Where were you born?
Albany, New York.
Okay.
1917.
Ah.
And actually, it's interesting that this was actually during the First War.
Mm.
And I've lived through the First War, but I participated naturally in the Second War.
Mm-hmm.
I was in dental school at the time the Second War broke out, and I was deferred until I graduated, at which time I was inducted into the Air Force. I was in the original cadre of this group that I joined, which was the 365th Fighter Bomber Group. I got a direct commission as second lieutenant, later promoted to first lieutenant, and of course during the course of the war I was promoted to captain. I was trained at the Medical Field Officers Training School at Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
What was that program like?
That was that was field training, military training for all the medical personnel,
Mm-hmm.
medical and dental, at Carlisle. And after graduating from Carlisle, I was stationed in West Point for a short period. And after that, I was stationed at Fort Dix, at which point I joined this 365th Fighter Bomber Group, and within 6 months we were in England. We went over on the Queen Elizabeth.
What was that like?
Oh, that was it was a tremendous ship. It was double loaded, and it zigzagged across the ocean to avoid any U-boats. There were no escorts for this ship because of the course that it followed. It zigzagged, so it couldn't be picked up by the subs. We landed in Scotland, and as a matter of fact, in a place called Greenock, in the Firth of Clyde. That's where the ship docked. And at that point we boarded the troop train and went down to Gosfield, which is about 5 minutes from London. And that was our airstrip.
What were your first impressions of England?
Oh, it's a beautiful country, just beautiful. Mammoth country and green, beautiful, beautiful country. I was, as I said, I was dental surgeon with this group. This group consisted of 3 squadron surgeons, a group surgeon, and myself. And I was in headquarters. I might as well tell you that my duties were naturally first and foremost to take care of the dental health of the personnel. This was facilitated by my running dental surveys periodically on all of the enlisted men and officers. And I also assisted in very minor medical emergencies. Before we landed at Gosfield, the Germans had already blown up our Red Cross building in Gosfield. So I was all of us were sort of jittery when we landed there. And there were air raids every single night. And the sky lit up just like it was noontime out.
What was the general drill for an air raid?
General drill was naturally they sounded the alarms, and we all had foxholes all the way around. At that time, we were in Quonset huts. So naturally, everybody jumped into the foxholes. So I went through that for 6 months, and then after that, we were moved to Southampton to train for the invasion. And we did not know at that time what was going on. We didn't know that there was going to be an invasion or anything until in the middle of the night we woke up and we looked up at the sky, and the sky was just black with planes going over. So we knew there was something afoot. We landed in Normandy on D+10. At that time, there were tremendous cliffs, as you know, and the engineers had strung up cables all along the cliffs. So we had to pull ourselves up the cliff wearing a full pack on our backs. And when we got up at the top of the cliff, we marched about 5 miles or so. I must add that there were barrage balloons that were strung up all along the beach with tremendous cables from one to another to prevent any low-level strafing by the Germans. At that point, we went to our airstrip in Caen, C-A-E-N, and I must add that looking at all the pillboxes that were just crumbled from our bombardment by probably from the 8th Air Force. I was in the 9th Air Force, which was the tactical Air Force. The 8th Air Force, pardon me, the 8th Air Force was naturally a strategic group. They did the heavy bombing. Our group did the low-level bombing and strafing. We were always about 5 miles from the front, and our function was to move our group each time the front moved. So we followed the front, and we were always about approximately 5 miles behind the front, and we supported the First Army. So we went through from France all the way through the Northern European campaign, through France, Belgium, Germany, back to Belgium, into Germany. At one point we went across the Rhine on these pontoon bridges that the engineers had built. So that was quite an experience. During all of this time that we were moving, we were constantly under bombing, strafing.
How was it? How'd that feel being that close to the?
Oh, we were scared. Everybody was, we jumped in our foxholes and everything. I'd like to add that when we landed, I'll go back now. When we landed in Normandy and we climbed up the cliff, at that point we didn't march 5 miles, but before we marched, we set up our pup tents, and every man had a buddy. So we set up our pup tents and went to sleep because the front was already 5 miles in or so, or more. So we were so exhausted. My buddy and I slept in a pup tent. He had one half of the pup tent and I had the other. And during the night, he tells me that there was a raid, and he jumped into the foxhole, and I didn't hear anything. I was so dead tired. And I said to him the next morning, I said, "Why didn't you wake me up?" He says, "I didn't want to disturb you." So, anyway.
Good friend.
Yeah. So anyway, we went through the whole thing, and it was a wonderful experience. I would not want to repeat it, but it was a wonderful, wonderful adventure, and I'm lucky to come through it alive.
What, how do you feel the general medical care was for the GIs?
I would say it was good. We had, as I said, we had 3 squadron surgeons and a group surgeon who was a major at that time. I would say it was very good. Of course, and all the pilots received psychological training and briefing, and naturally before flights. Practically, maybe 90% of the young pilots that I started with didn't come back.
Really?
It was a tremendous loss of pilots in our group. We now have a reunion about every couple of years. We have a newsletter, and it's a very active group that we have. So all the original pilots that I knew, an awful lot of them never came back, and there was a lot of new. Now when I go to the reunion, I don't know too many of the pilots from the old days because they were all young, new replacements.
How was the equipment?
Do you mean the dental equipment?
Right.
My dental equipment came in a chest. It was a portable setup. Most of the time I operated in a tent. And at that time the drill was powered by a treadle, the same as you would have on a sewing machine. And usually my corporal, who was my assistant, would pump the treadle. And I produced a lot of dentistry, even in those days. But it was a portable thing. Everything folded up and went into the chest, including the chair, which was a portable chair that folded up, was no arms on it or anything. And this is the way we traveled. Now this group, when this group moved, I moved with them. Everybody moved as a unit. The mess officers, everybody, dental, medical, it moved as an entire one unit. Many dental officers that I knew of were in general hospitals way back, sometimes in England. But I don't know, it was a lucky streak, or I'd say it was a lucky streak, or unfortunate, I don't know. But I was selected to be with a dental surgeon with this tactical outfit.
Roughly how often did you move?
I would say we moved our base 10 to 12 times during the campaign. It might be even more, I forgot. But many times our group was split up because the front moved so fast. There was a time when the group was split in half. Some group was forward, and the other part of the group was still in the old airstrip. And then naturally we caught up. But at a time when that's a time when the front moved very rapidly.
Right. I'm sure when they had the breakout, things were...
Right.
Did this experience help you in your later career, or was it nothing was transferable? Or?
Well, I would say that it sort of matured me a little bit more. I was only about 25
Mhm.
at that time, and I had seen a lot, and I didn't see any fighting as you have seen probably in the movies about D-Day,
Right.
but I did see a lot of other things. I would say that the experience was a great experience. It matured me in a lot of ways, and made me think of actually the frailty of life.
You had your training at Carlisle, for your field training at
Right.
Carlisle. Was that adequate? Did it mirror actual conditions, or?
Well, what it was, we had actually field maneuvers where we went out into the field and tried to find our direction as to where we were going, where the target was, and so forth. And a lot of these things we didn't have to use,
Okay.
but it was a very big experience for us to realize what the ground forces did, and it was good training.
Okay. Now you're about 5 miles, generally 5 miles behind the front lines.
Right.
What did you? Was there any recreation? Any recreational opportunities? You get to leave at all?
Oh yes, I had to leave. I had an R&R leave at one time. I went to Spa, Belgium,
What was that like?
which was a spring. It was very similar to, I would say, this town, Saratoga Springs. It was a place for rest and recuperation, and it was a spring where people went to take the waters and enjoy the advantages of a little town as Spa was. That was an R&R visit, and it was nice. It sort of refreshed me. Went back to the group.
Did you ever see any USO shows? Nothing seems to.
No, I don't think so. I'm sure there were, as you know, there were a lot of shows for the ground troops.
Now, did you have much contact with the local people? French, Belgians, German?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we became so tired of powdered eggs that we used to trade cigarettes and our rations of chocolate with the natives for eggs, fresh eggs. Now, I remember carrying my eggs back in my helmet, so that was a treat for us. Now, we stayed in, most of the time we were in tents, and it was, the winters in Europe were terrible, freezing, and we had a little stove in the tent, and we'd keep it banked all day, bank the fire so that we'd come back and it would be at least warm. See, what else can I tell you?
Now, was there a stove in your
No.
No.
No, we just bundled up. I bundled up and took care of the patients.
Must have been tough on the hands.
Yeah, it was. But I don't remember any stove in the tent that I used. I suppose when you're 25 years old, it's a little bit easier than it would be at my age now.
Um, you didn't have any nurses at all?
I had a corporal that was assigned to me as a dental assistant,
Okay, that was a male?
male, yeah. And naturally, the surgeons had medical technicians with them.
Mhm.
And the group surgeon, of course, he was more or less did all the administrative work for the surgeons, and also interviewed any pilots that needed any psychological
Oh,
training, because some of them sort of got burned out
Mhm.
from so many sorties.
Was the morale pretty good in the unit?
Oh yes, it was pretty good. Toward the second year, we sort of became a little depressed.
Why is it?
Because we didn't know when the war was going to be over, and we got tired. We became very homesick, and I think that the general morale dropped a little bit at that time.
Now you're in the
And
first
of
army?
course, what's that?
You were in the first army?
We supported the First Army.
Support the
I was
First
in
Army,
the
right.
9th Air Force.
Uh,
We supported the First Army, and we did all of the strafing
Mhm.
and the bombing, low-level bombing.
What was it like when the Germans counterattacked through the Ardennes for the Bulge?
The Bulge. Well, we had 2 liaison officers with us from First Army, and they had a big map that they would set up every morning and show us where the Bulge was and how it was outlined. And they outlined it in red pencil to show us the picture was an actual, it appeared like an actual bubble on the map, just like that, regular bulge. And everything was, when they broke in through the Ardennes and so forth, it was just another thing with us.
You weren't surprised?
Pilots went out. Well, we were surprised, but the pilots went out, did their thing, and life went on.
Did you make many close friends, or?
Oh yes, I did. As a matter of fact, a few of the, yes, we were in a tent. I was in a tent with most of the pilots and group administrator officers. Probably the tent was maybe, sometimes it was a pyramidal tent, but it was about 10 men in the pyramidal tent. And yes, as a matter of fact, I was friendly with a pilot who was killed, and he is now memorialized in our newsletter, and I think they're going to set up some type of a memorial to him.
How were replacements treated?
Very good. Very
They
good.
were.
They were good. They were all very naturally trained pilots, and they were all nice guys. They were young. The psychological makeup of the fighter pilot was different from the heavy bomber pilot. The young pilot, the fighter pilot, was more of a gung-ho guy, itching to get into it, the young kid. Whereas the pilots in the 8th Air Force, stationed in England, they piloted the Liberator, the Flying Fortress, the heavy bombers. They were more of a settled, I don't know that they were any younger, but they were more of a settled group psychologically. So they were more of a steady pilot, because naturally the fighter pilot did a lot of aerobatics and did the dogfights with the Germans, and they were gung-ho guys. But as I said, the Air Force pilot was more of a settled, because these heavy bombers were just flew across the channel and dropped the bombs and came back.
Did you get any flying time in as a passenger?
No, I did. The only flying time that I had was when I went on R&R, and I went with a group of GIs, and at one point we flew over Aachen, Germany, which was like I would say that it was like a honeycomb when I looked down at the buildings. Every single building was bombed out. It was like a honeycomb. And while I was sitting there during the flight, the pilot came back and asked me if I wanted to pilot the plane. And I told him, I said, I'm not a pilot, I'm a dental officer. He said, that's all right. He says, come on up. So he put me in the pilot seat, and he told me to look at the horizontal on the dash, and look at the directional. And he said, grab the wheel. I grabbed the wheel, and it was an amazing thing. The slightest movement, the plane dipped a little bit, banked a little bit to the left or right, and I was just sweating, and I was gripping that wheel, and so it was quite an experience for me.
I take it you didn't get any flight pay for that?
No, nothing. But he did tell me to watch that horizontal, and it appears this way, you know, on the dash, on the instrument panel, and it was quite an experience for me.
That's your first and only time that...
That was my first time. Last time, I sweated.
So you got into Germany, you went over...
We got into Germany, went over the Rhine, a pontoon bridge, and we went into Fritzlar, and we went into Aachen, we went into, of course, when we went back to France, we were in Reims, France, we were in Fritzlar.
Any exposure to German civilians?
No, I just saw, well, sometimes along the way we'd see some of the dead Germans as we traveled to the next base. We saw a few of them by the roadside. At one point the Germans started using horse-driven wagons. We saw a lot of animals that were dead, loaded up along the roadside. But we were back and forth from Germany to Belgium. For some reason, probably as the front moved and so forth.
So, go ahead.
When we got to, I just wanted to mention that we went to, it was time after the war, or during the war, you know, we thought we were going to be transferred to Africa, and or the Asian part, and so we were worried. We thought our group would be transferred, but we weren't. Instead, we came back and from Belgium, and we came back on Liberty ships. So we went back and was discharged from. I was actually discharged from Greensboro. And I had to stay there because I didn't have quite enough points to get out. So accumulated my points and was discharged.
And when were you discharged?
1946. And the Liberty ships, all the Liberty ships came into Boston Harbor, and there was a big hullabaloo. All the ships from Boston came out with their hoses, spraying the water hoses, and there was a big celebration, much different from the Vietnam veteran, which is sad. There was no celebration, nothing for them.
What was your feeling, what were you feeling being home?
Well, frankly, I was thrilled to be home. I was thrilled it was over. I was over there 3 years.
Is there anything you wanted to do when you got home that you hadn't been able to do for the past 3 years?
Well, I tell you, lots of times I think it happened to all the veterans. We felt that we lost time, that we lost part of our lives in time. And now that I look back on it, what's 3 years, you know? So, but I was anxious to start practicing. I was anxious to start my practice. And now that I look back on it, I should have taken my time and gone back to pharmacy college to get my degree.
Mm-hmm.
I went to pharmacy college before I went to dental school. And I went there 2 years for my pre-dental work. If I had to do it over again, I would have gone back at least to get my degree in pharmacy, then go to dental school.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have done that under the GI Bill.
Right.
When I was in pharmacy college, the dean asked me to stay and get my degree. I said, no, I want to go to dental school, and I've been accepted. I look back on it now, I think my decision was right, because had I stayed in pharmacy college, I would have been drafted after graduation.
Mm-hmm.
I would be deferred while in college, but I would have been drafted. Now, had I been drafted, I would have been drafted before I went to dental school, and I would probably have been drafted in as a private. And might have been a little dangerous for me. Who knows?
So it worked out in the end.
So my decision, I feel, was right. But I could have gone back after my discharge. I could have gone back, but I was so anxious. And that is a feeling that I think every veteran felt. But I should have, before I opened my dental office, I should have gone back under the GI Bill, I could have,
Right.
and gotten my degree in pharmacy. So it always comes in handy.
So you opened your practice?
I opened my practice immediately, and in 1947, I bought a building on State Street in Albany, and opened my practice. I've practiced now for 50 years, including the 3 years in the service.
Do you have any general impressions about your military career? You can summarize?
Well, as I said before, it was a wonderful adventure to go through it, see the towns as we moved through France, Belgium, Germany, see the countryside, what was left. It was very revolting to see the destruction that was done by the 8th and the 9th Air Force, which was actually necessary. So I would say that it was just a wonderful experience that'll be with me all my life, but I wouldn't want to repeat it.
Have you gone back to Europe?
No, I haven't gone back, unfortunately. I got tied up in my practice, and I never went back.
Is it something you'd like to do at some point?
Yes, I would love to go back to probably try to cover the route that we covered in the campaign. It's just that things happened, got married, etc. I've got involved with my practice with postgraduate work and
Right.
so forth. And I never took the time, but I did take the time for a lot of vacations. And I did go to a few of our reunions of my group, and which is a very active group. And unfortunately, I don't know too many of the men. There are so many who were naturally replacements,
Right.
and also many of our men have died. It's a question of, it's a matter of, what, 50 years or so, 60
Sure.
years. So a lot of our officers and enlisted men passed away. I feel that I am very fortunate to have been there when everything was going on, and I feel that I'm very fortunate to be still living and healthy, and I feel good about that.
Very good.
I seem to value a lot of these things rather than a lot of material things now. Material things seem to have faded away, the importance of material things. Well, these are the things that have happened to me, and maybe it's a result of the war, but I think the war and living has given me a perspective which I have as a result. I'm 83, I'll be 84 in September, so I think that I sort of evaluate things now that were not too important at that time.
Sure.
My attitude has changed. So I value life and love. And as I said, material things are fleeting.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Sutton. Very good interview. We
Okay.
appreciate it. Now,